Hello. We want to welcome you back to another exciting episode of Quest for Truth with yours truly, Douglas Hamp, and my intrepid co-host, Rob Skiba. We are excited to be with you today. A lot of fun things we're going to talk about. We're going to pick up from where we left off last week, and we want to get this thing... Ooh, there we go. We'll get this started off right. So, Rob...
Excuse me. Sorry.
Yes.
Fun.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
Well,
so we're gonna pick up where we left off last week.
or we could pick
I'm not
off.
quite sure where we left off last week. So.
Well, you know, we were talking about
Yeah.
Revelation chapter 9. We were discussing the finer points of theology, and you know, we want to remind people that, you know, Rob and I enjoy. I mean, we love studying the Bible, and we named our show "The Quest for Truth" because we really do want to know what is the truth. And you know, Rob, really, the bottom line is, what is reality, right? I mean, we can argue about the truth, and you know, it's fine if we both make our case. You know, I mean, I think this happens all the time, right? You know, you can have a lawyer in a court of law make a good case for something and be completely wrong. You know, the guy that gets convicted might not be guilty at all, or vice versa, but there was a very persuasive case for guilt or innocence, whatever it may be, and yet that person could be totally, you know, just the opposite. So we want to know, what is reality? And so as we get into topics, and just for the record, we really agree on most things. There's some different points that we're both, again, looking for what is reality. And as soon as I discover reality, I think this goes for you too, but as soon as I discover reality, I'm going to ditch what I was believing before and go with what is reality, because that's the only thing that matters in the end.
Right. The program is called Quest for Truth. It's not called Corner on Truth. Neither one of us claim to have the corner on truth. We're looking for truth. Now, you know, we do our own research, and as a result, we come to certain opinions. But I think both of us are flexible enough that if the case can be made and it's persuasive enough, then we'll change our view. And I've certainly changed my view on a lot of things, actually, in the last probably 5 years, as if I've increased my my research. When we left the ministry my wife and I were both a part of in April of 2010, since that time, since April 2010, all I do is research. You know, before it was just kind of a hobby with a full-time job, but now, you know, it's something that I do all the time. So as a result of having more time to do research, I've actually changed my opinion on a lot of things that I had held beliefs in before, based on the teaching of others. And what I always tell people is, like, look, don't believe me. Don't believe a thing I say, and don't believe the thing Doug says or anybody else says. Do your own research. You know, we're here just to share what we think we found, to hopefully spur you on to do some of your own research.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, again, we don't have the corner on the truth. We could have named the show that. Would have been fun. Corner on the
Corner
truth.
on truth.
You know, but hey, who's got the corner on the truth? Who has 100% perfect theology? You know, that's the question that I often ask myself. Not to excuse myself for bad theology, but, you know, in the end, nobody has perfect theology, because we're all still, to some extent, discovering who God is, and we're all still learning what the Bible really says about God, and a lot of times it requires that we undo some of the traditions that we've been taught. Sometimes it requires us to undo some of the bad theology that we've maybe taught ourselves, and sometimes it just requires us to read the Bible. What an idea. You know?
There's a thought.
Oh, I know. You know, and I tell you, when you read the Bible and you really get into it, like, oh my goodness, it doesn't say what I was taught. It seems to say just the opposite. And there can be all kinds of reasons why a particular doctrine was held for such a long time. A lot of it goes back to replacement theology. It goes back to a hatred of the Jewish people, and thinking that the church, the Gentiles, have replaced Israel. Then, you know, all those promises, etc., that were made to Israel suddenly become reinterpreted for the church. And if you grew up in that tradition, or even something like that tradition, I suggest that we're all sort of slaves of Augustinian theology, without even knowing it. It's something that is just, it's there, and yet, when you start to go back and really check out the Bible, you're like, boy, it doesn't actually say that. If I let Israel be Israel and the Gentiles be those who are grafted into the Commonwealth of Israel. So anyway, not to totally get off on that, but those are just some of the topics out there.
Yeah, while you were talking, I was trying to pull something up. I saw a graphic online at one time that I actually tweaked a little bit because you mentioned replacement theology, so I'm just going to put this up there. This is what, I know everybody has their definition of replacement theology, but as I'm looking at it, if this is what people believe, you believe in replacement theology. If you believe that it trucked along as Israel, all of a sudden cross, boom, church, that's replacement theology. That's not what Paul teaches. Paul teaches that we were grafted into Israel. In Romans 11 and Galatians 3, he tells us that we were adopted into that family and become heirs to the blessings of Abraham. That's not replacing anybody. That's joining a family.
Absolutely. It's like adopting somebody, and that person becomes an integral part of your family, and then suddenly they kill everybody off and say, no, I am the family, And it's like, well, I don't think that's really what God had in mind, So we could probably go on for that for a long time. I guess we could if we wanted to. We could talk about that, but I kind of want to get back into Revelation.
I would just say,
yeah,
I would just to put a cap on my thought on that, I would just say this is kind of the way it is now. You have unbelieving Israel here, and then you have believing Israel here with believing Gentiles here, who together become the family of God, the church, the bride, the body of Christ, and unbelieving Gentiles over here. I mean, that's why Paul says there's no longer Jew or Gentile or freeman or slave or, whatever. We're all one in Christ. If we are believers in Yeshua and Jesus, then there's really only two types of people in the world now. There's believers and unbelievers. So the question is, which one are you?
Yeah, it's a good point. We are grafted in. We haven't replaced them. So they were existent, and of course, it was always about the people that believed. It wasn't, if you were a Israelite and you did not believe in God, you rejected what was given. It doesn't mean that you automatically have eternal life. That's never been the case. It's always been about faith. I mean, this is what Paul is talking about when he talks about Elijah, who was an Israelite. He lived in the northern kingdom of Israel, and he has this duel with the 400 prophets of Baal, who were also Israelites. Okay, and they basically, they disqualify themselves because the free gift. Well, I wouldn't say that, but the RSVP, if you will, that they were given to come into the kingdom, they disqualify themselves and say, we don't want that. We don't want God. We're going to follow Baal and go after him. And so even though they were born Israelites, they were and still are the elect, but they disqualified themselves. Even though they were the elect, they disqualified themselves from actually entering in because they went after a false god.
That's right. They went after Baal. It's an interesting segue into what we're going to talk about today, I think, if we're picking up where we left off last week, because in my research, the Baals were just another spin-off of Nimrod worship.
Well, that's interesting. I'm not sure how you come up with that as being Nimrod. Baal, the god of thunder, he had various names or epithets in the ancient world, but I would argue that is simply talking about Satan. Satan by another name, Baal, of course, meaning Lord, but he was the son of El. El was considered the creator god, but he essentially usurped the creator god. So you go back and you look at these ancient religions, and there's always some creator god. And I think when they talk about the creator god, I think they're basically, more or less, talking about the real God, that there is this distant memory of this one who was a creator god, but then another guy came along who was given or assumed or usurped that authority, and the creator God went off to La La Land and was playing golf or something. And then this new younger God, who essentially killed his father, the new younger God took over, and that's the guy that you're supposed to go to. So I don't know. I'm curious. Where do you come up with him being Nimrod?
Well, that would be a very long conversation. I'd have to go through it all. But he was yet another sun god among men. I mean, you notice the Israelites were typically whoring after two entities, Baal and Ashtaroth, which is the female version. And so you basically have a spin-off of the Nimrod and the Semiramis going on there, and there are just a lot of connections with Baal being a sun god, and as you said, being the son of another god. In the case of him being Apollo, Nimrod as appearing as Apollo, which I confess I actually struggled with that for a long time. Tom Horn came right out with Apollyon Rising 2012 and really made a solid connection, but he didn't really, at least that I didn't see it anyway in his book. He didn't take you on a path to show you how Apollo connects to Nimrod. I actually found a much stronger connection with Dionysus. Dionysus and Nimrod was a no-brainer. It was very easy to connect the two of them together, specifically through Osiris, where in fact you could even do a Google search for Osiris-Dionysus, and you'll see that was one of the ways he was known. The Egyptians called him Osiris, but the Greeks called him Dionysus. But that Dionysus, who in the Greek mythology now is considered a brother of Apollo, at one time the two were one. They just got split into sort of the yin and yang idea. The poets got creative with it, and they looked at Bacchus to the Romans or Dionysus to the Greeks as the god of revelry and wine and drunkenness and chaos, whereas Apollo represented sense and reason and order. So you had, and Nietzsche picked up on that as well.
I thought Apollo was the destroyer god.
Apollo
wasn't Apollo the destroyer god?
That's the other problem.
Okay.
He is. In pre-Hellenistic thinking, in post-Hellenistic thinking, what happens is he becomes this kind of feminine-looking guy. That's he's the leader of the muses. He's the god of music and the arts and all that. But in earlier thought, he was known as the god of destruction, as well as the giver and stayer of plagues and pestilence. And it was that phrase in particular that really caught my attention, that he was the giver and stayer of plagues and pestilence. He was well known for that, and you can do your own search on that and find the attributes of Apollo and see that was true. And that's why I find it really interesting regarding what we talked about last week in Revelation 9. I'm going to pull that up here. In Revelation 9, 11 in particular, but prior to Revelation 9:11, you've got in the early verses there, you got these locusts coming up out of the bottom of the pit, right? In Revelation 9:7, and the appearance of the locusts was like horses prepared for battle, and on their heads appeared to be crowns like gold, and their faces were like the faces of men, and they had hair like the hair of women, and their teeth were like the teeth of lions, and they had breastplates like breastplates of iron, and the sound of their wings was like the sound of chariots and of many horses rushing to battle. They have tails like scorpions and stings, and in their tails is the power to hurt men for 5 months. And they have a king over them, the angel of the abyss. His name in Hebrew is Abaddon, and in Greek hath his name Apollyon. What was really interesting to me about that is a number of things, actually. Is most people look at that and they start thinking, well, it says that they're locusts, so everybody thinks locusts. Now, of course, you have Hal Lindsey and people like him who and I used to believe this myself, said that how else would John describe Apache helicopters? How would a first century guy describe the weapons of warfare that we have in the 20th and now 21st century? And when I was in the Army, I was a helicopter pilot in a cavalry squadron, and we actually had Cobras that had the teeth painted on the front with a Gatling gun sticking out. And so you look at a Cobra helicopter or an Apache helicopter or even a Comanche, but really the Apaches especially, you can kind of see, if you take this as symbolic, you can see, the tail comes up, kind of looks like a scorpion. It doesn't really sting anybody. It's just, used to stabilize the aircraft, counter torque. But, you and I have talked about this before. We just take Scripture literally. So if I just take the Scriptures literally, this is describing a chimeric I believe, Nephilim creature coming up, a bunch of them coming up out of the bottomless pit. But if you look at the description of them, they are a chimeric centaur. They're described as a horse. Yes, the horse has wings like Pegasus does, but it has a human head with hair like women and teeth like lions, and it's got the scorpion thing. So we're talking about a chimeric centaur, which to me made the statement in Revelation 9:16 make a whole lot more sense. Revelation 9:16, the armed horsemen were 200 million, and I heard the number of them. Anybody could go online and do a search for the number of horses on the planet, find a good equestrian website that tracks horse population, and you'll see the maximum number of horses that anybody suggests that are on the planet is 68 to 70 million. So right there, it disqualifies the additional view of the Russians or the Chinese or now the Muslims riding horses. I mean, like, what army uses horses of any consequence today anyway? If you take verse 16 in context of verses 7 and following, then we're talking about chimeric centaurs. And what's interesting about that is the centaurs can be traced back in Greek mythology to an individual named Centaurus, who just so happened to be a son of Apollo. So there's two connections to Apollo in Greek mythology right there, the centaurs and the locusts, which all through Scripture we see pestilence a lot of times is associated with locusts, and you got these creatures coming out described as locusts, and Apollo is described as their king. And again, Apollo is linked directly to Dionysus, who has a strong connection to Osiris that most scholars agree is Nimrod. So that's how I figured out the Apollo connection to Nimrod. Tom Horn didn't come out. If he did, I missed it, but I was trying to figure it out in his book and completely missed it altogether, because I had the traditional view of Apollo as this kind of, sort of feminine-looking, artistic, guy, not the destroyer. But when you mix in Dionysus with him, who is Bacchus, it becomes easy to understand him as a destroyer. And connect him to the Baals, and I mean that goes earlier. That's way earlier, the Baals.
Yeah, I mean it's fascinating that the word Apollyon, which is of the same root, appears in 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, and talking there about the son of perdition, the son of Apollyon. And though it's not a strong linguistic connection, there's still enough connection that you can make a decent case that Apollyon and Apollyon are one and the same. That Paul may have been using a different form of that same word.
Yeah.
Sorry?
Yeah, the problem I have with the idea that this is something that's new for me as well. And that's based on the phrase "son of perdition," which is used. That phrase is used twice in the New Testament. The first time it's used is in John chapter 17, verse 12, in regard to son of Judas is called the son of perdition there. And of course the Antichrist in 2 Thessalonians 2:3 is referred to the same way. So I dug a little deeper into that, and actually the New American Standard Bible has an interesting footnote on it, and this says basically that the son of perdition is simply this is right here, I don't know if you can read this on the screen or not, but I'm on BibleGateway.com looking at John 17 verse 12 and the footnote on it, that it is a Hebrew idiom for one destined to perish. So in other words, if somebody is destined to die or be destroyed, they would be called a son of perdition. It's just an idiom. It's just like, I don't want to, if we call somebody a son of a bitch, that doesn't literally mean that they came out of the loins of a female dog. It's just simply an idiom. And so it appears that this was a Hebrew idiom, and as I dug deeper, I found that that was the case. So I don't believe that the Antichrist is actually a physical offspring of the devil, just based solely on an idiom. And when I looked into Isaiah chapter 14, specifically in the Septuagint version, let me pull this up here. Isaiah 14 describes what I believe is the only biblical second incursion, which I would say is in the last days, because Revelation 12 describes a battle where Michael kicks the devil out of heaven, and his angels, and they come down to earth. And I believe Isaiah 14 picks the story up where Revelation 12 leaves off. And so Isaiah 14:12 says in the King James, "How art thou fallen from heaven, O Lucifer, son of the morning? How art thou cut down to the ground, which did weaken the nations?" I believe Isaiah 14:12 is a parallel to Revelation 12. And if you keep reading down to verse 21, it says in the Septuagint, "Prepare thy children to be slain." In the context there is Lucifer's children. So it appears that there's a second incursion in the last days. The devil comes down, mates with children. It says, "Prepare thy children to be slain for the sins of their father," that being the devil, "that they arise not and inherit the earth, nor fill the earth with wars," is in the Septuagint. It says cities in the King James, which is interesting because, of course, Nimrod was known as a builder of cities, but it says that the offspring of the devil will not rise up to the point where they're able to do anything of the sort. And so if you look at Revelation 20, you see that the devil experiences the exact same God-prescribed judgment that is only for angels that mate with humans. Mm. Angels that mate with humans, according to the book of Enoch, Joshua, Peter, Jude, they get bound in chains and are cast into the bottomless pit, also known as Tartarus, which is the prison of the gods in Greek mythology. And that's what you see happening in Revelation 20. "Then I saw an angel coming down from heaven holding a key to the abyss and a great chain in his hand, and he laid hold of the dragon and the serpent of old, who is the devil and Satan, and bound him for 1,000 years, and threw him into the abyss, and shut it, and sealed it over him, so that he would not deceive the nations any longer, until the 1,000 years were completed. After these things he must be released for a short time." And it's not until after all of that that the devil finally gets thrown into the lake of fire.
Right.
So, I always wonder, why does the devil even get, what's the deal with him going into chains and being put in prison for 1,000 years? Until I made the connection. That is the official judgment. It's like when we speed down the street, your speed limit is 40 and you're doing 60. There's the first fine, and then there's the added fine over that for every 10 miles above it. That's assigned by your city or whatever. This is the assigned judgment for angels that mate with humans. And so that's why I say the only biblical second incursion is Revelation 12, devil comes down, mates with women. Isaiah 14 picks up the story. Those kids never rise to any kind of, to be a threat of any kind. And the devil is then bound in chains, just like the watchers of Genesis 6 were.
You don't think that person is going to be Satan himself? I mean not Satan, but Satan is going to mate with somebody or pass on his seed, let's say, and then the Antichrist will be the actual son of the devil. I mean, he will be.
No, I would have said yes up until about 4 days ago. That would have been. Again, like I said at the beginning, if the evidence is compelling enough, I will change my view. 4 or 5 days ago, that would have been my position. But when I looked into this phrase "son of perdition," it didn't connect for me that perdition any more than son of righteousness is a son of a person named righteousness, or son of a bitch. I mean, these are idioms. And I'd already spent an awful lot of time making the connection and doing the research that Nimrod is connected to the sun gods of antiquity and related to Apollo. So, that's why I would draw a distinction. I don't believe that the Antichrist is the devil, nor do I believe the Antichrist anymore is a son of the devil in the sense of physical, like devil mates with a woman, baby grows up, baby becomes Antichrist and, evil tyrant. I don't buy that anymore.
Well, that's too bad. I have a book on that.
Well, you can convince me otherwise. But I don't see the beast of Revelation 17, who is described in great detail in Revelation 17. It has 7 heads, and it says that these heads are basileus in Greek, kings. They're individuals. They're people. And he is the 8th who is of the 7. So you have to figure out who the 7 are, and then do a process of elimination and figure out who the 8th one is who's of the 7.
Well, let me make my case. I'll do it quickly. Genesis 3:15, you have God says, I will cause enmity between you, Satan, and the woman, between your seed and her seed, right? So her seed is the Lord Jesus, and the counterfeit of that, being Satan's seed, would be the Antichrist, would be the one who is opposed to Christ or trying to be in place of Christ. So that's the first major clue. The second one is we see what happened in the days of Noah, that the sons of God came down and they did their stuff, and they created this hybrid race, so we have confirmation of it there. And then in Daniel 2:43, it says, in the days of these kings, so that it tells us that there's some kings that are coming, and it says they will mingle themselves with the seed of men, but they will not adhere one to another, as iron does not mix with clay. So the question is then, who are these kings? And if you go to Revelation 17:12, it says, John says that the 10 horns are 10 kings, which have received no kingdom as of yet, but will receive authority for 1 hour with the beast. So they were alive back in John's day. They are going to be alive whenever Antichrist comes. So that means that they're at least 2,000 years old. They're not just regular men folk, right? These are actually demons. They're fallen angels, if you will. Then you go back to Daniel chapter 7 and also Daniel chapter 8, where we see in Daniel 7, starting there at verse 10, it says, actually, I'm sorry, not verse 10. Don't you hate that? Here we go, verse 8. While I was thinking about the horns, look, another horn, this time a little one, grew up among them. 3 of the first horns were yanked up by their roots. Right in front of it, it had eyes like those of a human being. So you have this little horn that's growing up among the 3 horns, or up among the 10 horns, excuse me, and it grows up to be like them. Whatever these horns are, this little one grows up and is like them, and is even able to pull 3 out by the roots. And then we see the parallel passage in Daniel chapter 8, and it says, verse 10, and it grew up to the host of heaven, and it cast down some of the hosts, some of the stars, to the ground and trampled them. He even exalted himself as high as the prince as the host. Now, first of all, it doesn't say he exalted himself in the Hebrew. Half the book, by the way, is in Aramaic, but this portion is in Hebrew. So he doesn't exalt himself, but somebody causes him to grow up and to become great. So he's not doing it to himself, and I would say that is Satan who's doing it. But nevertheless, he rises up to the host of heaven. He grows up to the host of heaven. Now, host of heaven is a phrase that's talking about fallen angels or demons. So he grows up to their level, and then he's able to cast some of them down and some of the stars to the ground. Now, Jesus in Revelation chapter 1 is holding the 7 stars, which are the 7 angels, to the 7 churches. So this little horn is able to grow up to become the same stature, the same level or same power as these others, and then he's able to put some down as he sees fit. And I think it makes perfect sense that this would be the actual genetic son of Satan, and because Satan gives him everything. He gives him complete authority. He gives him his throne. He gives him all of his power. He holds nothing back. So just like you have Jesus, who received all authority in heaven and on earth from the Father, so too does the Antichrist receive everything from his Father. Just as you have the Holy Spirit passing on the seed into Mary, and then you have a commingling of those seeds to produce the body of the Lord Jesus, so too do you have a prophecy given in Genesis 3:15 that this seed of Satan is going to be passed on. I don't think it's through coitus, but I think he actually does it through a high-tech means, basically recombinant DNA or something like that. Mm-hmm. And then he's able to give his seed, probably in a little virus or something. He gives it to the person of his choosing, and then that seed goes into that man and transforms him from the inside out, so that he is actually able to grow up to the host of heaven. He's able to be transformed from being just a guy to then becoming, the ultimate post-human. He becomes part Satan and part human. And he now is the perfect counterfeit of the Lord Jesus himself. I mean, to me, it's just like, whoa, this is so diabolic, how Satan has brought this together. And so, I mean, those are the big verses that I see. I don't rest my whole case at all on the son of perdition thing. I would, in my book, Corrupting the Image, I talk about that, and I say, well, linguistically, it's possible, but it's not conclusive in my opinion. But I think it's at least possible. Concerning Apollo, I mean, I'm more concerned about Abaddon, because we do find Abaddon in Scripture. And Abaddon is actually personified. So to me, that tells me that rather than trying to look for somebody else, trying to look for him being, the son of somebody else, this is Satan himself. This is the destroyer. And he is the one who is the king over the bottomless pit. He has the key, and he opens it, and then he calls forth, these scary animals, these scary, whatever these are, hybrids of some sort, and they come out and do their business. And this is happening because it tells us, I saw a star fallen from heaven to earth, there in Revelation chapter 9, verse 1. So the star has already fallen. It's not that it's in process. It's not that it's going to fall. It's a fallen star. And where do we see the star fall? Well, we see the star fall in stunning detail in Revelation 8, verse 10. And a great star fell from heaven, burning like a torch, and it fell on a third of the rivers and on the springs of water. The name of the star is Wormwood, which basically means vile, or it's poisonous, essentially. So you have this incredible star falling from heaven to earth. Well, where else in Revelation do we see something like that? Well, Revelation 12, of course, where he sees this sign in heaven, a great fiery red dragon having 7 heads and 10 horns, 7 diadems on its head. He drew a third of the stars of heaven and threw them to the earth. All right, so there are these stars of heaven going to the earth, and after this battle breaks out, Michael and his angels fight, the dragon and his angels fight, there's no place for them. The dragon is cast out. He and his angels are cast out. So there's a repetition. There's a duplication of it. First, it's John is seeing it as this dragon taking a third of the stars, and then he sees it as Satan and his angels being cast to the earth. So it's a reduplication, essentially, of the same phenomenon. And so he then falls to the earth. There's the great star falling to the earth, and the littler stars falling to the earth. So the great star falling to the earth is, in fact, Satan. And that's what we see in Revelation 8:10. So then when we get to Revelation 9:1, I saw a star fallen from heaven. So he's already there. The star that has fallen, that is fallen, is, in fact, Satan. And then he's given the key to the bottomless pit, and then we discover that his name is also Abaddon, or also as Apollyon, which both of those mean destroyer, both in Hebrew and in Greek. So, that right there, I think it's a strong case that you have, you've got Satan is the one who is opening the pit. I just don't think it's possible to argue that it's actually Nimrod. I mean, is that indeed what you're arguing, that Apollyon?
No, not at all. Not at all. I'm a little bit confused because it appears in Revelation 9 that Apollyon's coming out of the pit, that he is the beast that Revelation 17 says the beast comes out of the bottomless pit. So if Revelation 9:11 is not the beast coming out of the bottomless pit, where do we see the beast coming out of the bottomless pit? You have Apollyon coming down, not coming up, if I understand you correctly. If you believe that he's the star that has fallen,
yes.
and I don't see it that way. And while we do agree that Revelation is not in chronological order, it is non-linear. I do see a linear progression with Revelation 8, 9 through 12, 8 through 12, really, actually, where I would not say wormwood is another name for the devil. I would say, in verse 8, Revelation 8:8, you got a mountain falling, burning like fire. It falls on the sea. Then you've got a great star falling from heaven like a torch. It appears to be like a meteorite or something coming down, and this star is called wormwood. I don't believe that that's the devil, and nor do I believe the star in Revelation 9. When we talked about this last week, Revelation 9:1 is that the word there is stare in Greek is feminine, therefore the pronoun that describes it should also follow the gender and be feminine. Autos should be she, not he. If the antecedent is star, which is feminine.
I disagree with that. I totally disagree with that, and I'll tell you why. Because, for example, in Spanish, you have the word persona. All right, persona in Spanish is feminine. You'd think, you can only use it of women. Well, that's just not true. You can use it of men because the word itself, persona, it's feminine, but it can modify both men and women. It doesn't really matter. It's completely irrelevant to who they are. Go back to Revelation chapter 1.
Wait, let me put it this way then. Okay, because I hear what you're saying. Last week, though, you said it should be she, but if we just take it as a star, as not as an inanimate object, then we could settle on it versus he or she, because we're both making an assumption here. You're making the assumption that the star here, that this is the star that has fallen or had fallen, is Lucifer, when I don't believe that chronologically that has happened yet. This is the midpoint right here. At the same time, this is happening right here. You've got this war going on in heaven,
yes,
and the devil being cast down. So I'm seeing it. We're both looking at this and saying, okay, you said the war happens here, and then the star comes down here and opens up the bottomless pit. I'm saying something comes down here with the keys to shut the bottomless pit, and the war happens here. I mean, we're very close to each other because either way you look at it, we have to be in the midpoint. I mean, we're talking with probably days on both of our views, either side of the exact middle of the 7-year tribulation period. Okay. But what I was suggesting last week is that had fallen from heaven was that we saw that same phrase in Acts chapter 19 regarding Artemis, who is Diana, who is Ishtar, Isis, Semiramis, Ashtaroth, all the same entity. And I'm going, well, that appears to be a confirmation of what took place in Zechariah chapter 5. Otherwise, what do we do with Zechariah chapter 5? Zechariah 5 has no confirming witness and makes no sense at all if we just leave it out there by itself. And so it appears that Zechariah 5, to me anyway, is supported by the statement in Acts chapter 19 regarding Diana, who is Ishtar, Isis, Semiramis, the half-sister / wife / mother of Nimrod, coming down to release her husband / half-brother / son from the bottomless pit, and then after that the devil gets kicked out of heaven. So that's kind of the direction I would go with. I mean, if we're going to look at the autos in Greek of Revelation 9:1, referring to the astara, then either one of us we both have to make an assumption here. It's either he, she, or it. So
I don't know, because in Revelation chapter 1 you have Jesus holding the 7 stars, which is a feminine word, which I would argue is rather irrelevant. But
unless it's talking about a woman in a basket.
Well, I mean that's a very enigmatic. It's a very enigmatic verse. I have to agree with you, but well, I mean it is. It's like, okay, what do you do with this? But I know. I mean, some people think it's a nuclear warhead. I don't know. But in Revelation 1:20, well, yeah, I don't know. Some people have this theory that they're trying to take the word Isha in Hebrew, and they're saying it's actually the word Esh, which is fire.
Yeah. And
based on that, you have a tube which is burning, and it's going from here to there. It's essentially a rocket with a nuclear warhead, and it's an interesting, it's got a lead basket. So when I first heard it, I'm like, that's interesting, but it all hinges on whether you can make Isha into the word Esh.
Right.
And because there's no linguistic evidence, there's no manuscript evidence, at least not that I'm aware of. I tried to poke around, but I couldn't find anything. So, but and of course they didn't show that, until they can show me that, actually, 4 out of 5 manuscripts show this, which, well, okay, prove that. And I haven't seen anything. It's so far as far as I can see, it's conjecture. Mm-hmm. So, I hate to change the words in the text. I mean, I just don't think it's a good idea,
Right. So then you would say that it's woman.
It's woman, and it just means I don't know what it means. I don't know what it means that there's a woman in a lead basket. I mean, it's weird. If it turns out to be fire, cool, but you got to show me the evidence, That's right. All I'm saying. But in Revelation 1:20, it says the 7 stars are the 7 angels. Okay, so here you have a very strong connection, as you do in Revelation chapter 12, where the angels, Satan's angels, are also called stars, and they're all cast to the earth. All right. Now, see, and part of the challenge here that you and I have talked about, that we used to read Revelation as first 1, then 2, then 3, and so on, and now it's like, well, it could be a whole bunch of different directions. What I see is we get a perspective, we go to the end of all of it, and then we come back and get another perspective. Because in Revelation chapter 6, I argue that we actually go to the very tail end of the tribulation, and that's why you have every island moves out of its place, every mountain is moved, the sky recedes like a scroll. Look, this is the last day, okay? You're out. This is it. Game's over, right? There's no more TO. It's it, done. And just before that, you have the stars of heaven fell to the earth as a fig tree drops its late figs when it is shaken by a mighty wind. All right, so this is not happening on the last day. What I'm seeing here in this 6th seal is it's a quick overview of the big end times events. So I would say the last 3.5 years are contained in that 6th seal. And the stars of heaven falling to the earth, I mean, you have to understand, okay, what do we mean by stars of heaven? Are we talking about Alpha Centauri? Are we talking about the sun? If it was one of those stars, then the whole thing is over, right? I mean, there's nothing more to talk about because the planet has been swallowed up, in this fiery ball out there. It's everything, everybody's gone, Jesus is not coming back because there's no earth to come to. Right, so it can't be talking about that, and because we have a very clear correlation in Revelation 1:20, the 7 stars are the 7 angels. So stars is a reference to angels. It's not a reference to some otherwise heavenly body. It's not a sun. It's not a meteorite. This isn't like some massive meteorite shower. I used to think that, as you have said. I don't think that anymore because, rather than I'm not opposed to outside evidence to help bring things into focus, but more often than not, the Bible interprets itself. And as I look for what is the interpretation of this, I find it there in Revelation 1:20. I find it in Revelation chapter 12.
And I would say I find it in Acts 19 and Zechariah chapter 5.
So, yeah, but I think but those are not as clear. I mean, okay, you have something that fell to the earth, some kind of a rock, apparently. I mean, is it a rock that they were really?
No, I believe if you look at the biblical timeline, the time the Bible was written, and I would credit this to a guy named King Wells, who wrote a book, Ancient Myths in the Bible, and in his book he made the suggestion that we should look at the Bible from a mythological worldview. Now that sounds strange because we're taught to look at everything from a biblical worldview, and he's not in disagreement with that. We should look at everything from a biblical worldview. But what he's saying is that the authors of Scripture lived at a time when the Sumerian gods were very real. The Egyptian gods were very real. The Greek gods were very real to the people of those days. I mean, they thought that Barnabas was Zeus and that Paul was Mercury. I mean, they had a concept in their mind that these entities were real, and it had no problem thinking that Barnabas was Zeus walking around, that Paul was Mercury walking around. So, based on that and a ton of other literature from other cultures, I mean, we can't just throw out every writing on the planet. I mean, yeah, when it comes to doctrine of salvation and stuff, it's solo scriptura, but that doesn't mean truth doesn't exist elsewhere. I mean, I had a manual that taught me how to use this computer. It contained truth in it. It's not in the Bible, but it helped me to work this computer. I do believe truth exists elsewhere, and that myth has its roots in truth. I believe the Bible itself even tells you that these were the great men of renown that we would see in Genesis 6:4, talking about the Titans, for example. Mm-hmm. So if you can accept that these entities walked around and walked this earth, one of them being a female goddess named Diana/Artemis, who apparently came down from the stars, came down from King James, I think it says Jupiter, but in the Greek it says from heaven. Just like this star, I saw a star fall from heaven, and if you look in the Sumerian mythology, this same entity known as Ishtar took off for the stars in a spaceship. So, do we throw all that evidence out? As a researcher, I look for clues, and I'm seeing an awful lot of clues, and I know you do too. Your clues are just taking you in a different direction. So,
well, yeah, I'm not opposed to consulting mythology from time to time. I mean, I think it's very fascinating, and clearly there's a lot of nuggets and a lot more that we should probably listen to. In as far as, I know somebody's going to misquote this one.
Here's a soundbite. Woo!
I know, a soundbite.
Periscope. Periscope. Yeah. Here we come.
Oh yeah, exactly. Yeah, I mean, well, let's just say this: we start with the Bible. We let the Bible interpret itself, and then if we can find outside evidence that corroborates that, cool. All right, that's basically what I'm saying. So, no, I mean, obviously, the people in the ancient world understood that worldview of Diana and this image which fell from Zeus or whatever. I get that. I totally get that. So all I'm saying is I don't believe that's a very strong proof text when it comes to Revelation, because just within Revelation itself we have stars equaling angels. Okay, we don't have to go too much further than that. We have that also.
So I understand your position. So you're saying Apollyon then, in your view, is the devil.
Yes.
And it's he has come down and he's opening up the bottomless pit to release a bunch of locusts. Where's the beast?
Well, I would suggest that the beast is, the Antichrist. At that very moment, I mean, I see these things happening simultaneously. That while the Antichrist/beast is in the temple saying, "Hey, everybody, I'm God," and he's kind of like proving it because he's actually taken Satan's DNA, and he's boasting and all this stuff. Satan then goes up to heaven. He then starts to rail against the Jewish people who are welcoming this person. Jesus said, "I came in my Father's name. Another will come in his own name, and him you will receive." And so there they are receiving him in the place that is reserved to pay homage and worship God, and they're ascribing that to this false dude. Satan goes up, he makes his case, the battle breaks out with Michael. Satan and his dudes get kicked to the earth, and it's at that point that the beast has received his fatal head wound. And then when Satan
you subscribe to the traditional model then of a guy who's already walking this earth apparently now.
Yes.
That will die, that will in Tim LaHaye style fashion will receive a mortal head wound.
Yes.
And then rise again from the dead.
Yes.
But Revelation 17 seems to tell you very plainly that the beast, who is the Antichrist, comes out of the bottomless pit.
Right.
So,
he comes out when Satan opens it up. That's how I would reconcile this.
But what you got? Okay, if you're saying Apollyon is the devil, he's got the keys to the shaft of the bottomless pit. He's opening the gate. Why did Revelation 9 leave the detail out of the beast coming out of the bottomless pit? Then, in your view,
it's a good question.
I mean, that's a pretty huge detail to leave out. I mean,
well,
unless Apollyon is the beast, which that's the view that I hold.
Yeah, I mean, I just don't see that he can be. I don't see that he can be the beast. But I admit I don't have an answer why it would leave that out. Maybe because it was reserving it for Revelation 17:12.
Well, let's look at Revelation 17.
Actually, verse 11. So
verse 17, Revelation 17, describes the the beast that has 4 heads or 7 heads. The beast, verse 8, the beast that thou sawest. I'm going to put this up on the screen here. The beast that thou sawest was and is not and is about to come up out of the abyss and go to destruction, and those who dwell on the earth whose names have not been written in the book of life from the foundation of the world, which I find very interesting, will wonder when they see the beast that he was and is not and will come. I mean, there's an antithesis right there. Where do we see the devil described as one who was and is not and yet will come, where we do see an individual like Nimrod described that way, especially when you look in the pyramid texts regarding Osiris. It's all over the place. He is absolutely known as the god of the underworld, who Revelation 9 seems to suggest that's Apollo as the god of the underworld. He's the king of the bottomless pit. And Apollo is Osiris, so make that connection. That seems clear as day. He was, he currently is not, but yet he will be, if the pyramid texts are true. Here is the mind that has wisdom. The 7 heads are 7 mountains on which the woman sits, and they are 7 kings. That's where I focused earlier.
There are also 7 kings, right?
No, well, it says they are 7 kings. The 7 heads are 7 kings. And I'm looking at the New American Standard, so for those of my critics out there, let's go to King Jimmy.
There you go.
Jimmy! Nobody fights against Jimbo.
That's right, because he's always right.
King Jimbo is always right. So Jimbo says in Revelation 17, verse 10, and there are 7 kings. 5 are fallen.
Yeah. Okay, and. That's an important word, right? And there are 7 kings.
But it's describing the beast, because if you go to the 11th verse, it says the beast that was and is not, that we just looked at earlier,
is also the 8th.
Is the 8th.
No. So you have
who is of the 7. So he's one of those 7 guys.
Okay, so right, exactly. Thank you.
He's not the devil. He's one of these 7 guys. Okay.
I agree. Here's my spin on it. This beast. Oh, first of all, who are the 7? I argue that these are fallen angels, and these 5 that have already come are the kingdoms. Basically, just like you have the Prince of Persia, and you have the Prince of Greece. Those are clearly demons or fallen angels in Daniel chapter 10. So too, these 5, or let's say these 7, are fallen angels, and they all are over a particular region or area of the world. So 5 have fallen. Which 5? I argue that we're looking at Egypt, because that's
kingdoms.
Well, okay, but
just jump to kingdoms.
No. Well, wait a second. No. But yeah, they are kingdoms. I agree with you. I agree. Look,
Kings.
No, hold on. Wait a second. In Daniel chapter 10, you have the Prince of Persia. All right. I think we're both on the same page. Yeah. That is a fallen angel. Yes? Sure. The Prince of Persia. Yeah, okay.
Sure.
All right. So the Prince of Persia is ruling over the kingdom of Persia, right? Yes? Are we on that one?
Sure.
Okay. So here you have this king who is ruling over a kingdom, all right? So I agree with you. And as far as the 5 that have fallen, it's the ones we know their identity, I argue, because they have to touch Israel somehow. So you have Egypt. They obviously touched Israel. Following them came Assyria, and then Babylon, and then Persia, and than Greece. Okay, so those are the 5 that have fallen. One that would be the Roman Empire, which, yes, it does have humans on the ground, but there is a demon king or a fallen angel king who is over those. And
but the beast is of the 7. He's one of these 7 guys, but he's called the man of sin. He's not called the fallen angel of sin.
I know. Yeah, that's the cool thing. That's the cool thing is that he starts out as a man. He's actually a beast. He's a hybrid because he now belongs to this group called the G7, right? The group of 7. But he's now the official 8th member of this club of 7. How did he become the 8th member? Because he was transformed. His DNA was transformed. He now has Satan's DNA in him, so that he literally is part angel.
Now, I want to stop you there because I want to say that I agree with what you had. You went on a long thing before, and I didn't have a chance to respond to one of the things you said before. I believe that's already happened. That in Genesis 10, 8, and 9, that he had, because like Daniel 2:43, you talked about that. That's not talking about copulation. Daniel 2:43 seems to completely reject that notion. It says, whereas thou sawest iron mixed with miry clay, they shall mingle themselves with the seed of men, but they shall not cleave one to another, even as iron is not mixed with clay. Cleave, you see that in a number of places, using the Bible to interpret itself as a marriage term. It appears that there's mixture of information taking place, but it's not happening through copulation. It's happening through
it's an exchange of, sure, fair enough. Right. It's an exchange of data.
So let me back up a little bit and maybe rephrase what I said earlier regarding the son of perdition, because I do believe it is quite possible that Nimrod, through some sort of defiling of himself, injected information, as you put it, regarding how whatever angel DNA might look like, of the devil. He wasn't born that way. It appears that he began to become that way. So as Dr. Michael Bennett, Dr. Future, says in Chapter 2 of Pandemonium's Engine, he calls him the world's first transhuman super soldier, that Nimrod began to be a Gaborim. Septuagint comes out and tells you giant. And so, it appears that, that the seed was injected into him somehow back in Genesis 10, 8, and 9. I don't believe it's a future event. Of course, we differ on our view of who the Antichrist is. I don't think he shows up. And if I go outside of the Bible and go into the back of your U.S. $1 bill, go to Washington, D.C., go to any Masonic lodge in the world, look at all of the Egyptian pyramid texts, it's all telling you that Nimrod's coming back. Osiris is coming back. And in fact, they even have a statue in the National Harbor called the Awakening, of a big bearded god coming up out of the sand. So, and Manly P. Hall comes right out and tells you that he's one of the most prolific writers of Freemasonry, that, that's what it's all about. They're all about the resurrection of Osiris. So, what's all that about?
Well, I find that all very fascinating. I really do. And I think that there's something there. I am not entirely able to put my finger on it. And I'm not ruling out that Nimrod can be involved here. We do have, one thing biblically to say, to make that argument based on the word Gibor is a little bit dangerous, because though the word Gibor could mean a Nephilim, it doesn't have to mean that. We see that God is also called a Gibor. David had Giborim, right? So it doesn't prove that these were Nephilim.
But the Septuagint, written by Hebrews who understand what the Hebrew word Giborim, translated the same Hebrew word for David's mighty men as ton dynatos, or ton dynaton, and used the same word in Genesis 10, 8, and 9 that they used in Genesis 6, 1 through 4. They changed it into gigantus, the same Hebrew word. So the Hebrew scholars that wrote the Greek Septuagint clearly understood the difference between the use of the word Giborim in reference to God, David's mighty men, and Nimrod, likening Nimrod directly to the same word that they used in Genesis 6, 4.
Yeah, I got you. I'm not saying that it's impossible. I'm just saying that it's not a open and closed case, and at least in my opinion. I totally respect what I totally respect what the translators of the Septuagint did. It'd be silly not to. But I'm saying we can't we can't goodness.
You're right.
Yeah, it must be you get the point for that one.
Oh, I don't know about that.
There you go. So, I mean,
Well,
we just have to be careful. That's awesome.
I'm looking at, because you were going on, and there are 5 kings in King Jimmy. But I'm looking on Bible.cc.
In the Greek, it says and.
Okay. Well, it's funny how so many translations chose not to use that.
Well, I talk about this at length in my Revelation Bible study, and it drives me nuts because the translators have decided that they don't need to translate the word and it's all over the place. And many times they're translating it as then, and I think that's a bit sloppy because there's another word for then in Greek. It's the word tote. But the word kai is being used here. So there's no reason that they should translate it as the word then, because then implies a concept, a consecutive kind of thing.
Yeah, I'm sorry. What's funny about that is my editor on my book, because I had quoted quite a bit from Enoch and Jubilees and some of those books, and the English translators were faithful in like Enoch, Joshua, and Jubilees of using the word and. Like literally almost every single sentence starts with the word and she was like, really? I mean, you use she's saying, I use the word and too much. I said, no, I don't. I'm quoting ancient text verbatim. But yeah, you're right. Apparently, the Hebrew writers love that word and.
Well, they really did. I mean, it is an important word. It connects things, obviously. And I don't think it's right for the translators is to start substituting the word then for the word and they do it very often in the book of Revelation. And it can make a difference. I mean, you might think, oh, it's not a big deal. Well, it's the Word of God, first of all, so I think we should just be faithful and do it whatever it says. It's not up to us to interpret when it comes to translation. I mean, interpreting is for Sunday morning. Translation should just be, this is what it says. That's where I'm going to leave it. So, I mean, I make that case because it says, and there are 7 kings. So it's not that the 7 kings are the same as the 7 mountains.
Well, I would say that the angel is interpreting the 7-headed beast in 2 different ways, because it says these are 7 mountains upon which the woman sits, and they also represent 7 kings. That's the way I would render that. It's using the word and. I mean, it's like, okay, these 7 heads represent 2 things. They represent the 7 hills upon which the woman sits, and it also represents 7 individuals. 5 fallen, 1 now is, 1 will come, and the 8th is one of those guys.
Yeah, I don't know. I think, I mean, partly when it talks about the beast, we do have kingdoms, or a kingdom, in view. But I think you're always going to have a kingdom whenever you have kings, right? So in Daniel chapter 2, you have this rock that is cut without hands, and it crushes the 10 toes, and then it grows up into this huge mountain and covers the earth. And later we see that in Daniel chapter 7, we see that that's talking about the Messiah, the Lord Jesus. So whenever you have a king, there's always a kingdom, and vice versa. But in verse 12, 17:12 of Revelation, the 10 horns that you saw are 10 kings. Okay, here's the thing: now you have these 10 kings, but they don't have a kingdom yet. All right, so. Right, so you see the distinction is you got kingdoms, which are the mountains, then you have kings, and then you have 10 kings that are still waiting to receive their kingdom or kingdoms, I guess it's singular. But and when they do get it, they're going to give it all to the beast. Why? Because the beast has been completely sanctioned. That's probably the wrong word to use there, but he's been given all the authority of Satan, all the power of Satan, his throne even. I mean, this guy has received something that nobody else has received. Who was the only person that we know of that Jesus offered, excuse me, I just gave it away, that Satan offered to give, everything to? It was to Jesus, right? So Jesus obviously didn't fall for it, thankfully, but this guy is going to go for it, and Satan gives him all these things. It must be that the Antichrist bows down to Satan and says, "Yeah, you're great," something like that. But again, we go back to Genesis 3:15. You've got the seed of Satan. So at some point, and look, if Satan did in fact give his seed to Nimrod, who then was transformed into a Nephilim, which I think is possible, but I don't think it was Satan, because as you have so rightfully pointed out, the reason that Satan gets thrown into the pit is because now he's crossed the line. Before it was these other fallen angels, but he personally is going to cross the line and give his seed to somebody. And
well, but my counter argument to that would be that Nimrod was not the biological offspring of the devil mating with somebody.
I don't think he has to mate. It's just a matter of passing on the seed.
Well, that's an interesting question. That would be an interesting thing to look into. I hadn't really thought about that. Definitely we know for sure if you mate with women, that's a bad. If you're an angel and you're mating with women, you have crossed the line because you've left your former estate and you've copulated with women. That's not cool. But yet this would take off to a whole different show. We don't have time to talk about it tonight. But this whole alien abduction routine that's going on right now, it doesn't appear to be about copulation so much as people are being abducted and put into laboratory-like settings and having seed extracted and eggs and all that kind of stuff, and implantation of embryos and extraction of fetuses and all that. It appears to all be very scientific. So are those entities being put in the bottomless pit? I don't know. I mean, it doesn't seem like it. It seems like they're out and about doing their thing.
Agreed. I don't think that they are thrown in automatically. I mean, I think regardless of the one incursion or two, you still have the demons that were doing it back in the days of Noah. They were given however many years they had. We don't know exactly, but they must have had some kind of a period to do that where they had the freedom to go about and do that until God's finally said, okay, you guys crossed the line 10 years ago or a century ago, and now it's payday. Now I'm gonna throw you in. So I don't think it's like an instantaneous kind of.
No, at least in the Book of Enoch, it definitely is not, because the first thing that the Watchers were made to do was watch their children die off within 500 years of their birth. So there was a period of time where the Nephilim ruled the earth as the Titans for 500 years and killed each other off in the clash of the Titans, and then there was the whole court scene where Enoch plays the attorney, basically, and then they are judged, bound, and buried for 70 generations. So yeah, it's not an instantaneous deal for sure. At least it wasn't in the Book of Enoch, anyway.
Yeah. Well, we are out of time.
Out of time.
And, yes, in fact, speaking of time, we are out of time. So cool, we're gonna have to run. I know, isn't that just cool? Yeah. So another fun conversation.
Just to sum up, please. You're gonna say the Antichrist is walking the earth today.
Probably.
He will at some point receive a mortal head wound and die, and then be possessed by something that is not mentioned in Revelation chapter 9, and become the beast. And
not quite. I would suggest that he receives the seed of Satan at some undisclosed time, probably. I mean, I don't know. I can't say exactly, but somewhere within that 7-year period. Okay, before the 3.5-year mark, or thereabout. He then goes into the temple already transformed. He has made copies. He's replicated his new DNA for the world. That is the mark of the beast. Agreed. And the promise is, hey, you can be immortal, you can have superpowers, because I have superpowers, look at me. So here, take this. And then while he's in there, now this is partly speculation, but it seems to me that when he's in the temple, some guy, pulls a knife or something, or a sword, bashes him in, and successfully kills him. I mean, his brains are coming out, but can't keep him in the grave. So just as Jesus was not able to be kept in the grave, neither is this one able to be kept in the grave. But the difference is Jesus let himself out, whereas this guy sort of needs somebody to open the door, and that's what Satan is doing by opening the door and welcoming him back. So, this is all probably happening within an hour, 2 hours, less, I don't know. Hard to say, but at the same time, Satan's up in heaven having his battle. He gets kicked out, and then he opens the pit, and he releases the spirit of the beast that does go down to Sheol, and then it comes back. So, okay. Yeah, that's how I would synthesize it. It's.
And I'll put a cap on my view also, so we can wrap it up. I believe he's already received the mortal head wound long time ago. I believe he's already become transformed into a seed of the serpent kind of thing, if you want to say that. He became a Gaborim in Genesis chapter 10, verses 8 and 9. He was the only other god of antiquity besides our God, known as the King of Kings and Lord of Lords, whose symbol was the cross. In Egyptian mythology was the Ankh, and the hoop represents resurrection. His soul bird is the phoenix, which is on the back of your dollar bill, which also represents resurrection. Numerous dying and resurrecting sun gods all through the ancient world have been associated with the same individual. All of the occult is all about raising this guy from the dead. I mean, all of their rituals and Masonic initiation and things like that is all about raising Osiris. The Book of the Dead, the Pyramid texts all talk about the raising of Osiris, who is Apollo, who I believe is Nimrod. So I believe he's already dead. He was the one who currently is not. He's in the underworld, in the abyss, that he is released in Revelation 9:11 as Apollo. He comes out of the bottomless pit. As it says in Revelation 17, the beast comes from the bottomless pit. So I believe that that's where he is, and that's where he's going to come from. And he does not show up prior to that. So that would be kind of in a nutshell what I would say is. And from that point on, I agree with what you said, that I believe that the mark of the beast is his genetic material will be passed on to people. We just finished reading Numbers chapter 16 and the red heifer and all that, the whole deal with corpse contamination in the Old Testament, and just coincidentally you're unclean for 7 days in the book of Numbers. So there's a lot of very interesting things regarding his genetics there. And why does he sit in the temple of God? Well, there's only one place to sit in the temple, and that's on the mercy seat, which would presuppose, if you believe that there's going to be a third temple, which I do believe there will be, I believe the Ark of the Covenant is going to be found. And the reason why this guy doesn't die is because he's already dead. He's a Walking Dead guy. He's Frankenstein. And that's why he's able to show himself and anybody who's watching, see, I am God. Who else could sit on the mercy seat? Which would be very compelling to the Jews, who just so happen to have the statue of Nimrod outside the Hebrew University, and their Supreme Court has the pyramid with the all-seeing eye embedded in its roof. So they're already worshiping the guy. It's not going to be too much of a stretch when he shows up and says, hey, I'm the one you've been looking for, and you want the proof? I'm going to have a seat here. And he sits, and then the rest is, as they say, is history. So that would be it in a nutshell. That's all we probably have time for tonight. We can maybe pick up again for a part 3 next week.
It's getting late.
Crickets.
All right, man. Hey, this is fun. It was really really fun. Well, this is our 60 minutes, and until next time, everyone, God bless you. Stay in the Word. There's a lot of exciting stuff in there, and someday we'll figure out exactly what Revelation 9 is talking about. Take care.
Amen.